So my name is Chris Lopez. I'll be moderating today's webinar. It's titled, Is the Denver Housing Market in a Bubble? So we get this question, I don't know, like 3 to 10 times a day. Probably not inflating that too much. But with me, I got 2 experts on the market and on data. I've got Charles Roberts with me, that many of you are familiar with. He is an investor, a realtor, and also the president of Your Castle Real Estate. Our other guest host is Lonnie Blesser of Nova Home Loans. And we're actually using his presentation put together, which is full of data. These guys collaborate a lot on data. And so I asked them both to come on here and give the presentation. So Charles, welcome.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Lonnie, welcome.
Hey, good to see you again.
All right, so guys, let's just jump into this. I'm going to just ask you this question, like we all get asked numerous times a day. So, man, guys, the market's just been like hot. The prices are so expensive. I mean, are we in a bubble with it stopping?
Yeah, I started hearing this over 2.5 years ago, beginning of 16. I started hearing this question and concerns from my clients. So I started asking all the realtors I work with, and I got tons of questions from them. You know, are we in a bubble? When are prices going to slow down? When's appreciation going to slow down? All those types of things, a lot of fear-based questions. So I thought, as an amateur economist who loves economics, and I write a newsletter every week, I thought, well, I'll go do some research. So I spent, several weeks doing research, onto this topic, and I came up with this class called, Is the Denver Real Estate Market in a Bubble, to deal with everything that I've ever been asked. I've taught this class now to probably about 1,000 agents, and I've taught it from groups of 2 or 3 to groups of over 50 people many, many times. So at this point, I have hundreds of hours into this class and into this material, and it's amazing of how it keeps changing, but we'll talk about that more. So, but what I thought I'd cover first is we need to define what is a bubble. And so I went to All Know in Google, and I found 4 different definitions that I really like. The first one is used to refer to a good or fortunate situation that is isolated from reality or unlikely to last. The second one is my favorite one. It's a bubble is a run-up in the price of an asset that is not justified by the fundamental supply and demand factors for that asset. Third is a surge in price is often more than warranted by the fundamentals. And then fourth is a temporary condition caused by unjustified speculation, which we saw a lot 10 to 15 years ago in the Sand States, where investors, quote, bought brand new homes, say, for $2.25 and resold them the next day for $275 and thought they were smart and making all this money. Well, the market wasn't built on solid fundamentals. It was built on speculation and how long the market might last. So what I want to what I wanted to do when I created this class is our market built on speculation, or is it built on fundamental supply and demand factors? So that's what we're going to, get started with. So first thing I had to look at and go, okay, what caused the last bubble? Just know I've been in the mortgage business for over 20 years. And back, from especially Denver led the market into the subprime craze, starting really in about 02, 03. And back then we had what I call fog and mirror loan approvals, where basically if you could fog a mirror, we could get you a loan. There was a time where you didn't even need a job or income to get a mortgage at one point in time. And then we had as a belief as a country that everyone should own a home or buy a home. Third thing was this belief and lie that was perpetrated by many mortgage brokers, but even a few agents too, who would say, hey, you could always refinance out of your crappy subprime loan into a good loan in 2 or 3 years. Because most of these subprime loans had a 2 or 3 year arm at 7-8%, and then they would reset at about 12% typically.
So I want to come here. What's the definition of a subprime loan versus a prime loan?
Probably the best way to describe it is, to me, subprime credit's under 620 credit scores. And so we got to the point where we could go down to 550 with no money down for a short time. And as I joked with our broker investors, I would say, so do you guys get an extra set of keys at closing? Because honestly, at 550, you're pretty much going to foreclose on the borrower. Great. Their credit is that bad. So but that was the kind of lending we were doing that Wall Street was funding, and the security agents, and Moody's and stuff said, oh no, these are great loans. Little did they know what was behind everything. So it was a mess. But I would hear this all the time, that people would be told, hey, you got a 580 credit score, Chris, and guess what? Yeah, your credit isn't very good right now, but in 2 or 3 years, you'll be able to refinance into a good fixed rate loan. The only problem is, Chris, you've worked hard to get to your 580 credit score. You've avoided bill collector calls. You haven't paid bills on time in years, and you just let debts pile up. Now, what makes you think that you, as the tiger in this instance, is going to change its stripes? And that was the problem, is most people never did change their stripes. They didn't all of a sudden become a homeowner and go, wow, I'm going to pay my bills on time every month now. They kept doing the same things that caused them to have crappy credit to begin with. So guess what? That's what they continue to do.
And what were the typical terms of these subprime loans? No income down. No money down.
There was no money down. We did them. Most of them were done as an 80-20, an 80% first mortgage. It was a 2 or 3 year arm with caps of 5% after the first fixed rate period. And then the second mortgages were usually 30-15 balloons, where it was a 30-year amortization, but a 15-year balloon on it, so you had to have the loan paid off or refinance after 15 years. And often those rates were in 11 to 12% range.
Wow. Okay.
So it made the homes really expensive, but because we weren't verifying income often, didn't matter much, So people could buy a home without us verifying their income often, or we use such loose debt to income ratios that we were honestly setting people up to fail.
Great. I'm sure we'll get into lending now versus back then later in this talk here. So what are some other factors that caused the bubble?
Another thing was, back then we had Nehemiah. Nehemiah was around for 2 or 3 years until FHA shut them down. Nehemiah set themselves up as a nonprofit.
What is Nehemiah?
Nehemiah was a down payment assistance organization, and they saw, because FHA is always allowed gifts from family members, employers, and nonprofits to help a buyer buy a home. Well, Nehemiah set themselves up as a nonprofit that was basically funded by the home seller, who would, quote, give a gift to Nehemiah, who would then gift that money to the buyer.
And the money they're gifting is just money out of the loan.
Out of the sales price.
Mm-hmm.
And so it worked pretty dang slick. It was a brilliant idea.
Until the music stops, right?
Until the music stopped. But that led to greater demand as well. Then we always had this belief as a country that home prices would always rise and that you could never lose money. So you had all these things coming into effect, and it led to a huge surge in demand, because why rent? When you could buy a home. I mean, we didn't have to verify income. You didn't need good credit. You didn't need money down. I mean, why not buy? So you couldn't lose. So that's what we had, this huge surge in demand that had happened. Then all of a sudden, beginning in 07, Wall Street started tightening things up a little bit. They started getting smarter and smarter with the lending. And one of my favorite websites from back then was called lenderimplodometer.com. And every day they would highlight which loan programs went away today, which lenders closed their doors today. And it was an amazing website that chronicled what the heck was going on in the mortgage market. And as that supply of cheap, easy money was going away, we had all that demand, and all of a sudden that demand went away, and we had this huge problem with supply. Back then here in Denver, we were running 6 to 7 months of existing homes for sale. But the problem was, underlying it all, was how much inventory we had of new homes, and we'll cover that later in the class, in the webinar here today. So to me, the top reason I hear cited today from clients of why we might have a bubble is prices. Prices have just gone up too fast, too far, for too long.
Yep.
Okay. But then I go, well, let's look at one of America's favorite stocks right now, Amazon. Amazon stock, they started the year of 2012 at $175 a share. As of actually as of a couple of days ago, I know, they were up almost $1,800 a share. It's an increase of like 1,000%. So, Chris, is Amazon stock in a bubble?
No.
Why?
I think I think Jeff Bezos is a genius.
Okay.
I think he's going to be one of the best entrepreneurs ever. But aside from that, like, no, it's just they're conquering the world. They're conquering the internet.
Right.
Like, you're justified.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And normally what I like to point out to people is just their stock price doesn't give us enough information.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can look at their stock price and go, wow, it's got to be in a bubble. But is it really? You got to look at the fundamental supply and demand factors of the stock. And like Amazon, like you mentioned, they're transforming how we shop, where they're putting brick and mortar stores out of business all around the globe because they're transforming our culture and how we shop for things. So what I want to do is take a look at the fundamental supply and demand factors of a real estate market. And we'll look at, just here, the Denver market. First off, what drives demand for housing? First, we have three primary factors like population growth, job growth, and family changes. Some secondary factors include low interest rates, rising rents, and just the idea that honestly renting long term is typically a bad idea financially for tenants, but it's great for us investors. So this chart, population growth is one of the top factors that drives any real estate market in the country. And you look at Denver back to 1970, there was a little over 1 million people living here. I moved here in 95 for grad school. We had about 2.1 million people. And we're now well over 3 million in Metro Denver. And estimates are we're going to hit at least 4 million by 2040. I've seen some estimates as high as 4.5 million people by 2040. So the main thing is, okay, everyone who moves here or is born needs a place to live. So population growth is a huge fundamental factor for real estate.
And just to clarify, I mean, this population growth is taking in people moving and also people leaving, right?
Right, yeah. And so this chart goes back to 2000, and the lower green bars show the natural birth over death rate, which
is about what?
About 20 to 25,000 people a year.
And that's the birth rate.
Yeah, the birth rate minus the death rate. Okay, so we're growing now what's called natural growth of 20 to 25,000 people a year in Metro Denver. The gray bars is the most important piece. It's the net migration into Denver of where people coming minus people leaving. And of how that number back in 15 peaked at about 40,000. And right now we're running about 25 to 30, and the state's predicted we're going to continue to run at about 30,000 net new people a year as far as the eye can see. So roughly we're going to be growing by around 50,000 net new people a year for a very long time, it appears here.
And I'm looking at your graph here now, and I want to describe it because a lot of people are listening to it. So I don't see 1 year since 2000 where the net migration and the natural increase is a negative number.
Right.
I see, like in 2003 or 2004 or 2005, net migration is a little bit negative.
Right.
But even the natural increase is still positive, right?
Yeah, basically from 02 to 05, net migration was less than 10,000 new people. Well, we've had quarters where we've had that many net new people move to Metro Denver in the last few years in one quarter. And that was 4 years ago. And this is what's going to be amazing later, is to see how many new homes home builders were building when net migration was so small. This chart, courtesy of Your Castle Real Estate here, just shows the relationship between population growth and home sales. And I really like this one because the dotted line tells us where we should be having home sales at every year. And then the solid black line tells us where we've actually been. And you can see back in the late 70s, we had a boom here in the Metro Denver real estate. And what happens often after a boom is you have what? A recession or a bust. And we had that a lot in the 80s of we didn't sell as many homes. Part of it was oil and gas went downhill fast in 85. But we also had earlier in the decade interest rates of 18%. That help handicap people from buying homes. But what was amazing, if you look at the 90s, most of the years we're right about a Goldilocks phase.
And what does that mean exactly? What's the Goldilocks phase?
Well, meaning that we were selling the right amount of homes based on our population each and every year. Then you look at this chart and you look at that huge spike like in 03, 04. And holy moly, we sold about 15,000 more homes that year than we should have.
And now it's because all these people
Yeah.
with these
All the subprime lending.
unqualified loans are getting them, right?
Yeah, I mean, you didn't need a job anymore to get to get a mortgage, and you couldn't lose if you got a mortgage because home prices always went up, and you could always refinance. So there was no danger anymore or perceived danger.
Charles, I want you to jump in here because I've heard you talk about this. This is a great time. You talk about as a landlord owning like 20-some rental
29.
properties, 29 rental properties. I've heard some horror stories from you on there. Tell people about the vacancy and, getting a renter versus that renter buying a home.
Right. So the landlord market was, in a sense, the inverse of the regular real estate market. What happened 03, 04, 05 was that it was so easy to buy property that no one had to rent anything. So our vacancies peaked above 13%. So we got hit with this double whammy. So in 03, 04, 05, I owned 29 units in Denver, Aurora, Commerce City, places like that. They tended to be lower end units. So 03 and 05, we actually had a net outflow of people from Denver. Why? Because we actually had a bad economy. We had 7-8% unemployment. And then on top of that, what we had was it was literally easier to buy a home. It was easier to go to Lonnie and actually get qualified to buy a place than it was to come to a normal landlord and get qualified to rent a place.
Now, back then, like if you had a renter, what were you looking for? What was the FICO score? What was the income times rent multiplier? Like, what was your basic?
It was like wanting to know what gang they were associated with. And if it was a gang that was making money, they could give you $1,000 on a Friday night, I would take them.
Well, before that crash.
What kind of question is that?
Well, I meant before. Let me ask you, rephrase it. So before it got that bad, what was your before vacancy went horrible? What was your
basically you would pull, background checks, see how many times they've been evicted, that kind of stuff. Check and see if they actually have a job, call their employer. If it was Section 8, finding out what their Section 8 voucher was worth. Just the basic things that you want to check on people. Yep.
And then it got seriously that bad, just anyone that can pay cash on Friday night.
That's why I'm still here. The people who didn't do that basically lost all their properties and they're out. They're out of the business. It was, by and large, I believe the people who did what they had to do to actually pay off their loans and continue paying their loans who are still here. And it was very, very tough.
And just to kind of jump forward, but now you have 16 residential rental properties or so?
Yes.
How hard is it to rent those now?
Very easy. Very easy. Night and day. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and why? Because we have, 3-4% vacancy and the landlords have the upper hand. And then someday that will change. And I don't think it's going to change for a while, but for now it's actually great being a landlord.
Yep. Yeah, and so you saw that huge spike where we had the bubble before here in Denver. And then, of course, what happened after a bubble, the bubble burst and we had a recession. And instead, a big dip down, and we sold a lot fewer homes than what we should have because everyone's home value went underwater, so no one was selling or only selling if they absolutely had to, which was typically all the subprime borrowers. So, but then since about 2012, 2013, we've been back to very close to a Goldilocks phase of how many homes we've been selling based on our population.
Now, how can it be Goldilocks phase when prices are going up double digits?
Because this is just looking at the amount of home sales we're having and comparing it to our population.
Okay.
This is how many homes we should be selling based on our current population. So we're right there of where we should be. Next thing I want to discuss is just of how millennials have impacted Metro Denver the last several years. And it's just amazing. I know as of end of 16, there was nearly 900,000 millennials living in Metro Denver. And what was amazing is I remember seeing this story last year that only 24% of them lived with their parents back in 2015. And the national average was 34%.
So that's 24% in Denver.
In Denver. And so I expected that rate to be higher in Denver because Denver is a higher cost city than the national average. There's actually the opposite way because what's happened is Denver has imported tens of thousands of college or grad school educated millennials, to the Denver area. And so they're coming out here, striking it out on their own. And a lot of them, especially if there's two incomes in the household, are making six figures. So they can afford to rent or they can even afford to buy a home. And it's just amazing at how quickly we are attracting millennials here in the Metro Denver area. Next is just the impact of college graduates, to continue on. This was interesting. Of 2018 college grads this year are going to be making an average about $53,000 a year, according to research done by executive search firm Korn Ferry. Next, Zillow according to data from last year, said 28% of recent college grads in their 20s live with their parents in 16 versus 19%. So we're seeing that number grow nationally, but locally.
Hey, sorry guys, we are just having echo here, so I'm gonna speak over here. And all right, let me go back to your PowerPoint now.
Okay.
Enlarge your screen. All right, sorry about that, guys. We had to fix an echo.
But here in Denver, according to Zillow, only 15% of college grads live with their parents, almost 50% lower than the national average. So it's amazing. Not as many millennials live at home in the basement here percentage-wise as they do in other parts of the country, which honestly surprised me because I thought it would be higher because we're a higher cost city. But we have so many highly educated people, young graduates moving here. Factor number 2 is job growth, which would average about 3.5% a year from 13 to 15. Now in 16 and 17, it slowed down. 18 is predicted to be around 31,000, but it seems like that number is going to be picked up because I'm sensing and hearing a lot more job growth and also population growth again. But what was interesting to me here, the household survey, which is reflected in the bottom 3 numbers, shows last year that nearly 65,000 more people in Metro Denver were employed. But I think what it was all Uber drivers and real estate agents.
How long? That was a good one. Yeah, that's really funny.
Okay, webinar's over. Thank you. Go home, Monty.
So, and then next is just the impact of technology jobs here in the Metro Denver area, where last year Colorado added over 6,000 new tech jobs. And now the tech sector makes up nearly 10% of our state's workforce with an average salary of $110,000. And one of the things I found really interesting back, I think it was in April, the Denver Business Journal ran their cover page story and several stories after that was about how small to medium-sized Silicon Valley companies are moving to Denver, either relocating or opening up a second office here. And it was amazing to see that. And they said, well, why is Denver is the #1 city in pretty much every survey of where tech workers want to work if they have to relocate.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just tech companies. I saw a headline is either today or yesterday in Google News that the North Face company, a big outdoor apparel, they're moving the headquarters from somewhere around the San Francisco Bay Area to Denver now because of the cost of having their headquarters is so much cheaper in Denver.
Right. And so it's just amazing to see this is going to be one of the factors why Amazon may choose Denver for its second headquarters. Is where do their employees want to live? And having lived in Seattle and Denver are very similar cities culturally and recreationally, of where Seattle's a very outdoorsy city, even with all the darn rain. You just got to wear galoshes all the time and raincoats. But people in Seattle love to be outdoors too. So I could see very strong chance that Denver will get Amazon.
And we also have a lot more sunshine.
Yeah, and we have a lot more sunshine. And once they come here, they'll never leave and go back to Seattle like me. So, one question I get asked a lot, is are these jobs that are being created, are they good paying jobs? So I like to do some research, and it's interesting. According to ladders.com, as of May, there was nearly 6,000 job openings in Metro Denver that paid over $100,000 a year. And typically, the top industry or the top field that's always hiring in Metro Denver is RNs, registered nurses. Usually start out in the low to mid 50s plus sign-on bonuses. So those are pretty decent jobs.
That's a good salary.
And that's always typically the #1 job that's being looked for in Denver, that's being hired for. Now, it's been interesting. Job growth slowed in 16 and 17. And I was getting a little worried about that. But at one point last spring, the unemployment rate had dropped to like 2.2%. And I remember reading this article back in the Denver Post, and they said the unemployment rate was so low, it was acting like an anchor on our state's economy or our region's economy. And what's interesting, end of last year, unemployment rate peaked back up to like 3%. In December of last year. I thought, wow, maybe things are going to get a little easier for employers to hire. Well, since then, unemployment rate keeps dropping. We're back down to like 2.3, 2.4% in Metro Denver. And our biggest problem is we don't have enough people to hire. I mean, you look outside every store and restaurant, for example, you always see now hiring signs. And shoot, like my 17-year-old son got a job as a server at a great Italian restaurant near us, and I think he's getting paid $12 or $13 an hour just to bust tables.
Really?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I've heard Olive Garden pays better than that. In case if you're looking for a part-time job.
Yeah.
So it is just amazing of how much employers now are having to pay here in the Metro Denver area to get employees because, job growth has slowed a little bit, but it's because there isn't enough people to work. This was interesting. Jones Lang LaSalle, or JLL, a financial and professional service firm, they did this, I think it was June. They created a city momentum index, which covered 131 major global cities and ranked their prospects for success. Denver was one of just 8 U.S. cities that made their top 30 list of future-proof cities. And they said that future-proof cities have higher education infrastructures, innovation capability, better environmental quality, and more technology firms, and more international patent applications. And those are all things that Denver has. And this declaration is making Denver, or acknowledging Denver as a big-time player for companies looking to relocate here from other large cities around the country. And more jobs just equals more people, which equals more housing demand.
And something that because I actually really dug into that report. I actually got off your email a couple months ago now. And what shocked me about this report, and I really encourage anyone to Google it, is that the other cities that were named in this report, they were like major cities, San Francisco, London, New York, Boston, and Denver's sitting there at number 20. The two that stuck out to me is Denver at like 20 and like Austin, Texas at 18 or 19. And they were both ahead of Washington, D.C., which is at like 21 or 22. And it boggled my mind that Denver and Austin were sitting with these, like, I would say, like big boy cities out there around the world. Like their names are even associated with them.
Yeah, we're no longer a cow town.
No.
Anymore. I mean, we've become a major metropolitan city in the eyes of the country and even the world now. Another thing I always have people ask about our income levels growing. We did see some strong income growth in 13, 14, and 15. It slowed down a little bit last year. Statewide income growth was a little over 4%. And I know Denver wages increased last year about 5.5%. I just heard this morning they're up about 5.2% this year, June from June. So we're seeing stronger wage growth, but I will also say this, and I've been reading this and I've experienced this with my clients, is a lot more people are getting one-time bonuses. It may happen every year, but those bonuses don't count in their average hourly wages or salaries. So that's one way things have changed, or where we're seeing employers use bonuses more than given actual raises, maybe. And
I mean, is that, because I know I've seen headlines, and Charles, you know this data better than I have, that the income growth is not keeping up with the housing growth. I'm assuming, you said these bonuses are not being
they're not calculated
reflected in there?
No, that said, there is no question that the prices are up 40% and wages have not kept up. What's important to understand, though, is that while clearly homes are less affordable than they were 5 years ago, what you have to remember is that 5 years ago, 2012, 2013, homes were the most affordable they've been in Denver in recorded history. Meaning the wages, you put in wages, interest rates, and the price of homes. What happened is, as the prices went down and interest rates remained low, homes were very, very affordable. So clearly, homes are less affordable than they were 4, 5, 6 years ago. And sooner or later, one can assume that homes really will become unaffordable. But at this point, we still have way more buyers than sellers. Therefore, they're not unaffordable because people can buy them. That's the structure of the market right now.
Right. And this is something I get all the time, and I get so frustrated when I hear economists or reporters talking about this. Even NAR's chief economist, Lawrence Yoon, talks about this. And
what is NAR? You're using lingo that people don't know.
The National Association of Realtors. So, and what I feel like is so often people are comparing apples to oranges. So let me show you what I mean. Like last year, median residential home prices from everything from condos to single family detached rose 7.9% last year. That was an increase in dollars of $27,000. Okay, now did incomes rise 7.9% last year? No, it was somewhere in the 4 to 5% range. So I'll take the lower number, 4%. The median household income in 16 was 73,000. I rounded down to 72 to make the numbers easy. So that's 72,000 divided by 12 is 6,000 a month. So if they got a 4% raise, what's 4% times $6,000, Chris? Oh wait, he's a realtor. Sorry, he doesn't know numbers. It's 240. It's 240 a month.
That's the former loan officer.
Yeah, exactly.
Lonnie, give me a break. I'm busy on my Uber app.
Sorry, yeah. So, their income rose 240 a month last year, but yeah, their payment, because the home prices went up, but their payment only went up $132 a month. The last time I checked, 240 was still bigger than 132. And I have had junior high and high school kids in my class sometimes tag along with their parents. And I have asked them, and they do tell me that 240 is still bigger than 132. And, they teach them new math. And so I was always worried, but they keep telling me, no, 240 is still bigger than 132 a month. And that's where home prices can honestly triple. The appreciation increase could be triple or quadruple of what income gains are. And the homes can still remain, quote, affordable.
And that's exactly what's happened the last 5 years.
So some other factors that have impacted our housing market demand-wise is just family changes. I mean, people typically buy and sell their own homes because of one of 6 things or events in their life: marriage, divorce, having kids or adopting kids, kids moving out, job relocations, and job promotions or raises.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been happening a ton here, of where even the marriage rate is up substantially in Denver County, which is the only county that actually records their license rates and stuff. And, of course, divorce is probably pretty steady, but we're seeing more childbirths. We've also seen a lot of companies relocate here. It all started back in 2011 with Arrow Electronics. And I remember when that happened, I thought, okay, this was probably a game changer for Denver when Arrow Electronics decided to relocate here.
Why? I don't know who that
Well, they were just a huge wholesaler of electronics, and basically their entire distribution channel moved with them to Denver.
And you thought that was a catalyst?
And that was going to be a catalyst for Denver, and it has been. So,
interesting.
So the next thing is just real quick. Okay, where do people want to move to? And this is a study that's done, or a survey done every quarter. And Metro Denver is always a very incredibly popular area where people want to move to. And often for the last couple of years, Colorado Springs has been the most popular county in the country that people want to move to.
In the whole country?
In the whole country.
Wow.
So, and it's interesting. And where do most people from Denver move to if they leave? It's
probably Colorado Springs, right?
It's been the Springs.
Yeah.
So they're not relocating far in most cases. So some secondary factors that are driving housing demand. Let's look at it from the renter's perspective. Last year, builders added over 13,000 new apartments, which was a 38% increase from the 2016 numbers. And it was interesting. End of last year, the vacancy rate had increased to 6.4% on apartments. And I remember the media starting to flip out. Oh boy, the market's turning, it's changing, and we're building way too many apartments. Well, it's amazing what's happened in the last 6 months. And so Charles is missing this, but I know, sorry, but I know through the second quarter, the vacancy rate's back down to 5.2%. End of the second quarter, and average rents were up 3.9% compared to June of last year. So all of a sudden, the apartment market has turned again in a positive direction of the builders can't keep up with the demand.
I haven't seen a headline yet in the Denver Post.
No, you probably won't see that. But that's truly what's happening, and it's making me think there's got to be more people moving here.
So let me ask you this, because I hear this all the time. I mean, cranes. You see cranes everywhere.
Right.
So does that indicate that?
I mean, it does, but part of the problem is, too, with cranes and all types of construction, one reason why we're seeing more of them is not so much maybe we're seeing more, we're just seeing them there longer. Whereas, say 15 years ago to build an apartment community, it might have only taken 12 to 18 months to do it. Today, it's typically at least 24, sometimes 30 months. So you see those cranes there longer, and it's the same thing with housing too, of where a dozen years ago, builders could put up a home in 3 to 4 months. The average right now is 8.5 to 9 months. So it looks like they're building more homes, but they're really not. They're just there on each home for a longer time period.
Now, clearly, there is more building there than there was during the downturn. So a really important thing to remember is that what happened during the downturn is our population continued to increase, and we built very, very little housing inventory. So we had 10 straight years of more people moving here, more households, and not enough units for them. So at this point, yes, the permits have gone back up and we're building more than we were 5 years ago. But if you look at the raw numbers, we have a long way to go to get to any sort of saturation point. Will it happen someday? Sure, I would expect it would. But just because you see cranes out there doesn't explain the whole situation. The bigger situation is the 10 years of people moving to Denver and not enough housing being built to supply those groups of homes of those people.
Yeah, because I remember back like 08, 09, and people were moving here in droves without a job. With, our unemployment rate got to be almost 10% here too. And it was like I jokingly would tell people then people have raised their hand and said, I'd rather be unemployed in Denver than unemployed in Detroit. And that's what was happening. People were relocating to Denver during the Great Recession, even if they didn't have a job because they believed they had a better opportunities here.
Interesting.
So this quick chart from Adam's Data Solutions just shows of the single family market share by investor size, of where 78% of all rental properties are owned by an investor who owns just 1 or 2 rentals.
Now, this is for single family.
Single family. Yep. Looking at it from their perspective. And then about, what is it, like 6%, or is that 8%? I can't read it. 8% of investors own 3 to 5 properties. And then 4% of investors own 6 to 10 properties. So it's really, most of the real estate investors are out there are much smaller in size than, say, the big boys. Like the big boys that own more than 100 units is only 2.6%.
So when I read these headlines, or I'm not headlines, articles, like these hedge funds like Blackstone, I think, and these other hedge funds where, they've just bought up, tracts of single family homes during the recession. And I've heard that, they're basically holding on to a lot of properties versus selling them because the rates of return are so great. I'm assuming it's accounted for, and I thought it would be a lot
I thought
bigger.
This number would be a lot higher, a lot bigger piece of the pie, but it's not. And there's almost none of that here in the Metro Denver area. It happened a lot, like in Phoenix.
Okay.
Of where I know their share down there is much bigger. I know because BlackRock and even Warren Buffett's, one of his companies, bought a bunch of single family homes too for rental properties.
So have you guys seen this trend yet? Because we were actually talking with property manager Mark Cunningham a couple weeks ago, Charles, and he was saying he works with a lot of property managers around the country, that a lot of property managers are actually losing clients because homeowners are actually selling their rental properties because they bought them before the bubble, and they couldn't sell them. Now they're no longer underwater, and they're starting to sell their rental properties. Have you guys, heard of that anywhere else? And is that enough to move the needle on the market?
I've heard that from some of my property managers I know, and it's more of the accidental investors that happened, during the Great Recession where, instead of selling their home, they kept it as a rental. Those people are selling now more likely. But
if you're a property manager, it might affect your business, but it's one of 500 needles moving back and forth. It doesn't really change the market.
So it's not affecting the macro big picture.
Yeah, and it just comes back to, like JLL Research said back in, May or June, that capital is extremely hungry for Denver multifamily apartment buildings. And the reason why is just the underlying fundamentals that we have strong net migration into Denver, strong job growth, favorable tax climate, infrastructure, and our quality of life. And it was interesting in this story, they said, when large organizations like insurance companies, Wall Street firms, and banks come to Denver to buy properties, they have a pronounced impact because they typically just come here and just stay. They're buying long-term buy and hold investors typically for 8, 10, 20, 30 years.
And actually, I find that data really interesting just because, talked a lot of just small individual investors and the market's hot. Well, I mean, these companies with their teams and researches and billions of dollars and, interns shoved in the closet poring over data, they're buying, even though cap rates are going low, they keep buying. My guess is they know more than I do. They're smarter than me.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. I've been tracking for the last year the sale prices of existing apartment communities, basically anything built from the early 90s through about the early 2000s. Those apartment communities on average are selling for about $230 to $250 a unit.
Yep.
Okay. And the second thing I want to point out is Jeff Hawks, who's one of the top apartment brokers in the city. I remember this story from last fall. He sells all these apartment communities. He said he's disappointed if he doesn't receive at least 10 offers on every apartment community he sells. And his average list price is probably, $75, $80 million.
So
Wow.
My average is a little bit lower than that, but I will tell you, I'm closing 2 investor deals tomorrow, both between $230 and $250.
Yeah.
3-bedroom, 2 baths, Aurora South type of 7 cap rate, $1,850 rents. That's exactly what we do.
Yep. And so, but the institutional money is still pouring into Denver by the billions of dollars every year. And this chart just shows the apartment vacancy rates and rental rates. And what's amazing, what you will see on here is you see the vacancy rates start to spike in 2013 and 14. Once the vacancy rate in 12 went below 5%, 5% is the magic number in the rental market. And once the vacancy rate goes below that, we will always see rental rates spike. And that's what has happened. This is another chart here from your cast that I always love that shows this long-term going back to 1981. And you can just see of how when you have low vacancies, you have high appreciation in rent. When you have a high vacancy rate, you see appreciation rates very low. Like here in the third column, you saw in the 2000s, we had average rent growth of about 0.8% a year. It's almost no rent growth for about 10 years because the vacancy rate was high and everyone could buy a home. So the market shifted and just now the market's gone in the other direction. As Charles was saying earlier, it's now in the landlord's favor, whereas for earlier, it was in the tenant's favor. But all we hear in the media is how bad it is for the tenants. But Charles, do you remember back 10, 12 years, 15 years ago, did the Denver Post ever write a story about how hard it was for you as a landlord?
No, that's a really good point. So landlords, we're not victims, right? We're just always the bad guys. So in 2003, when the vacancy rate was 13.4%, somehow we were still taking advantage of the tenants, and now we continue to do that. But look, Denver Post, they have to sell newspapers. I don't want to be in the newspaper business. I would probably write anything I could to actually get an advertisement. And that's just the way it is. They have to have you probably know this in newspapers, there are people who write just the headlines. That is what they do for a living. Very often it doesn't really describe what's happening in the world.
Right. And just one thing I always like to remind, especially younger people like millennials, and you hear this a lot from them in surveys, or we don't want to be tied down to a mortgage and home ownership. And one of the things I like to remind them is just please realize you're always tied down to a mortgage. You're either paying your own mortgage or your landlord's mortgage. Now, I love my tenants because they help me pay my mortgages on my properties. But and it's just amazing. Sometimes their eyes go wide open and go, whoa, we never thought of that. But it's true. You're always paying a mortgage and you're always tied down to one. It's just you get to choose whether you want to pay your own or your landlord's. Now, from the investor side of things, what had really drove housing demand here nationally, but here locally, was the Fed's ZIRP policy, or zero interest rate policy, that it implemented end of 2008 that dropped short-term rates basically to zero. That also dropped.
So you just threw a lot of economic data back there. So back up and talk like an eighth grader.
Okay. Well, back in 2008, when the Great Recession really started happening and the market was tanking and we were at the abyss and stuff was said, and we could see over the abyss and it wasn't pretty. Well, the Federal Reserve did a lot of changes, and they dramatically lowered short-term interest rates, and they dropped them to basically near zero. Well, that also caused banks to drop their interest rates to near zero on savings accounts. So there were actually people back 10 years ago that still had 6, maybe even 7 figures saved in the bank. They had $1 million there, and they would get their, get a monthly statement from Wells Fargo and see, wow, I made $10 this month in interest. That pretty much sucks. So they started looking for other opportunities, and where they really started looking was real estate, because real estate can be a very passive investment, but also is very consistent, and it's very easy to understand. Everyone knows every individual, every person needs a place to live. So it's something that's very easy to understand. So investors flock to real estate nationally, but here locally as well, especially starting in about 2010, where investors started buying homes, and we started seeing a ton of fix and flips that year and growing after that. And so we just have seen investors buy a lot of properties here in Denver, and a lot of them are still hold on to them, because where else can you do better? You got strong rent growth, you got strong appreciation. Why the heck would I sell? I mean, unless there's something personal going on in my life, you're getting, in retirement and you want to sell so you don't have to manage anything anymore, maybe. But otherwise, why sell? You're doing so well with real estate in Denver. Another M I'd like to just briefly talk about is just marijuana, where it's had a huge impact on industrial or warehouse space. But I don't know that it's had much of an impact in residential real estate here in Denver. Because if you look at our cash sales rate, we're running around 15% each year. Now, I know like down in Pueblo, they have a little more of a problem with this, and you'll see the stories about that. But it also makes sense. You can buy a home in Pueblo for $80,000, where the same home here in Englewood or Littleton's $350,000. So if you're a smart entrepreneur wanting to grow marijuana in a home, you can buy 4 homes in Pueblo or 1 home in Englewood. If they're smart, they're going to go buy in Pueblo, because you can buy a lot more property. So if they're smart, that's what they're going to do. So it's probably had more of an impact down there than it has in Metro Denver. A final thought here on demand is just looking at, and nearly every week there's stories online about how great of a state Colorado is, or the Front Range is, or Denver is, the metro area is, how great it is to live, work, retire, go to college here, take naps here, whatever the case is that they're doing research on. But one of the big ones is always U.S. News and World Report. In 2016, Denver was ranked number 1 in the country. Last year, we were ranked number 2. And then in 2018, we fell to number 3 behind Austin and Colorado Springs. So people do see these reports and go, if they're thinking of moving, all of a sudden it puts Denver on their list. And another thing I would say is there's millions and millions of people that come here on vacations every year. And guess what? There's a lot of them that want to move here because they love Colorado. And I've had many clients move here, and they've told me, well, we started vacationing here 10 years ago, and we always said if we got a chance to move to Colorado, we would do it. Here's one of my favorite comic strips in the paper on Sunday mornings and every day is Zits. It's this couple, they have a 17-year-old son like I do. And this one's great. So the dad asked the son, how was the snowboarding? It was a waste of time. We need to move to Colorado or Utah or someplace with mountains. If I'm going to freeze, I want to do it at dangerous speeds. And the dad says, I'll mention that to our realtor. So that sort of sums up our market on the demand side here. So let's take a look at supply of homes. And we're going to start first with existing homes for sale. And this chart is from DMAR, from Denver Metro Association of Realtors. And it shows residential month-end inventory of homes for sale going back to like 1990 through 15. I'm always been bummed they never updated the chart since.
Great chart.
It is an awesome chart, but they haven't updated it the last 2 years. But what you can see here, the main thing I want to highlight is that basically we're running at about 70% less inventory right now than what we've long time averaged. I remember back in 06, 07, you as realtors hated the market then too. You hated working with buyers because there was 30,000 homes for sale. And in their price range where they were looking, there was 300 of them. They wanted to see all 300 of them, didn't they?
They
Charles?
did, but I was working with investors, so I'm closing 60 deals a year. But you're right, it was tough. What agents did is they just complained constantly. The typical agent helping a typical home buyer, they'd go out, look at 15 properties, and then the buyer would say, great, let's go out in 6 months and watch the price go down. And frankly, they were right. Everything's changed now. But for the investors, of course, it was a good time to be getting in as the market was going down.
Right. So we just see this huge drop in inventory. And so we ended 14 and 15, both with a little over 4,000 homes for sale. Same thing for 16. 17, we actually ended with like 3,700 homes for sale the end of last year.
And Charles, I know this is a similar slide you discuss all the time in your trends classes. What's kind of the healthy number or the average number that you guys predict for the Denver market? I've heard this, and I'll let you explain.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say 16 to 18,000. There's a bunch of variables that go into it. And one of the important variables that people don't talk about very much is the truth is people are moving less frequently. It used to be people moved roughly every 7 years. Now it's above every 10 years. So we would normally say in the 16 to 18,000, maybe a little bit lower, a little bit less, but it's nothing like 4,000 or 5,000. We're way, way off. So it's not important to pick the last few hundred or the last 1,000. What's important to say is that if we stay in that 5,000 to 6,000, we have no supply, and demand is bigger than supply, and you know what that means. When it gets to 8, 10, 12, 14, then we're going to start seeing a different market. We just haven't been there for years.
Here's another chart going back to 85 showing whether or not we've been in a buyer's market. Months of inventory every year going back to 1985. And you can see how in the late 80s, we had months of inventory, 85, 86, 87, 88, 4 straight years of 10 months or more of inventory, which was just flipping amazing. And then you look at it down here, this chart as well only goes through 15, but 16 and 17, we ended under 2 months of inventory. We're going to end there again this year too. So this year will be the 6th straight year under 2 months of inventory. And Charles, I remember you and I talking about this probably about back 4 years ago in 14, where we had noticed this and we were both going, how long could this last?
And what did we say? Did we say 4+ years?
No, we both thought it was going to end pretty quickly.
Yeah,
we thought
sure
everyone
did.
was going to start selling their homes.
Right. And that's a really good point, because Lonnie and I like to think we know what we're talking about. And we didn't see this going on this long. So the longer we do this, the less we really, really know that we can predict for sure. But this has been going on for 5 years. And no, none of the experts thought it would go on this long. And what's even more important is it doesn't show any signs of changing. We're still near record low inventories, even as we add to our population, meaning the number of properties on the market per capita is going down.
So just an observation. I've seen this chart before, but something that's actually jumping out to me as I'm staring at it now is, this is 30 years of data, and it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5 years. Only 4 or 5 years is in that balanced market range between 4 to 6 months of inventory. Otherwise, every other year is either a buyer's or seller's market. So, I guess historically I can infer that it's actually pretty normal not to be in a balanced market.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's sort of like Denver's weather. There's very rarely an average day. You either have way hot or way cold. That's right. And that's how our real estate, it's the way our real estate market is too.
So for people waiting to get in the balanced market, that just seems silly to me when I stare at that chart.
So what I did is started looking at all the factors of what's causing such a limited supply of homes for sale. And when I started creating this list over 2 years ago, some of this data wasn't available. It was just what I was sensing and talking with other experts out in the field. But it's been amazing of how the data has come in to support this. So we're like, first one here, like Charles just mentioned, according to the U.S. Census Bureau last year, only 21% of all households, even all renters moved last year. And of homeowners, what was it, like 1 out of 12 or something like that moved last year? People are just staying longer and longer in their homes. A second factor is, according to Home Advisor, Denver homeowners are the 3rd happiest in the country. And I have to ask, okay, do happy homeowners move?
No.
No, they don't. Charles, have you ever had a client call you and say, hey, Charles, we love our home, we love our neighborhood, but we're looking to move because we want more stress and anxiety in our life. Has anyone ever done that to you?
No, and I'd like to point out, I've lived in my home for over 20 years.
See, you're part of the problem.
I am exactly the problem. I'm never moving. It's too hard.
Yeah. So that's a problem that we're facing here. And then number 3 here, this is a change of one of the things that's been talked about for the last 2 to 3 years now and growing in intensity is this idea of aging in place. And like Harvard did a study of and now older homeowners are doing a lot more remodeling to their homes than what they used to. I mean, there's still a few homes out there where you walk in and you go, it's a time warp from the 50s or 60s or maybe the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But those homes are rarer than what they were 10 years ago because more and more of the long-term homeowners are staying and remodeling their homes. And some of them are remodeling them so they can age and stay in place. And like number 4 here just shows there's basically a tug of war right now going on for housing between baby boomers and millennials. And right now, baby boomers are still winning.
And then you say tug of war, like what does that mean exactly?
Well, just meaning of where baby boomers own so much of the housing and aren't willing to sell it yet. So this was a story, I think, from about May in the Denver Business Journal. I saw 3 surveys in 1 week. The first survey done by YouGov of 1,330 homeowners nationally revealed that only 30% of them plan to leave their current home in the next 10 years. That would mean in one way of saying they may be there on average 30 years. Second survey was done by bankrate.com about the same time, and it said only 19% of homeowners plan to move in the next 5 years, whereas 35% will be remodeling their home. So let that sink in. Even like say that one, only 19% are thinking about moving in the next 5 years.
Yeah, but almost double are thinking about remodeling.
Yep,
exactly. Right.
So buy stock in Home Depot and Lowe's. Yeah. That's my tip. Okay.
So don't buy real estate, buy Home Depot stock.
Yeah, you could do that too. The fourth factor here is the National Home Renovation Trend Report that showed 55% of homeowners plan to do at least one project this year, and homeowners are projected to spend about $340 billion this year on repairs and renovations to their homes.
Now, on all these like data of people thinking of moving and thinking of remodeling, do you have any type of historical context to compare that to? I know it's a very granular question, but is there any historical averages, or do people even track that?
There is, like, say, if you go and look at just of how long people have stayed in their homes in the past, it was, 6-7 years, and even nationally, the median now is about 9.5 years. The people stay in their homes here in the Metro Denver area. I've seen studies show that it's high as 11 or 12 years in a lot of the Denver suburbs, where people, the median age or median tenure in their home is 11 to 12 years now. Okay.
Right.
Some more factors is, this is just of how much longer people are staying. And this data is from 2016. It was 8.5 years. I know last year was up over 9 years. Second thing I would say is people are honestly more financially responsible today, where I've been in this business since 98. And one of my first questions for every buyer has always been, what's your monthly budget for your payment? Well, from 98 through 08, almost no one had an answer to that question. They would typically tell me, well, Lonnie, you tell me.
What can I afford?
What can I afford? And I would tell them, you got to be careful, because please realize I'm a commissioned salesperson that gets paid more money to put you into more debt. I want you to go home and work on a budget and come back to me, because I can get you approved for more than what you can afford, but I want you to be a successful homeowner. A third factor that's really going to impact our market is a lot of people have mortgage rates in the 3s right now in their current homes. And as mortgage rates keep creeping up, and I think especially once they go over 5%, we're going to see fewer and fewer people moving, because it's going to get really expensive for them to move. A fourth factor is, okay, I'm facing this, Charles, you're facing this too, I know, is the rising cost of college to pay for our kids. Of where my son will go off to college in a year. Yours just went off last week. That's why you have the tan, right?
Indiana, beautiful Evansville, Indiana. Thank you.
Come on, another realtor I know, her daughter went to University of Hawaii last year,
and they're in a Category 5 hurricane right now.
Yeah, well, hey, so another factor is there are still about 200,000 adult children that live at home. So maybe those parents feel like they can't sell yet or downsize. Also, some of them have their parents living with them. They may have 3 generations of adults living in their home. But one of the other factors is so many homeowners are scared that they can't find a replacement home.
That's a big factor.
And it has been for the last several years. It was interesting last spring, Ralph McLaughlin, Trulia's chief economist, said this. He said, if it's difficult to afford your next house, you're more inclined to stay put and renovate your existing home. It won't ever go on the market. This depresses inventory, further driving up prices.
That's just a great quote to sum up so much of this data.
Yeah. I mean, it just sums it all up. And I mean, like, Trulia is headquartered in San Jose, and like that market's been that way for decades already, where people just don't move in the Bay Area because they can't afford to.
Well, yeah, there's half the homes over $1 million out there.
Right.
Something crazy.
Oh, yeah. Next, we're going to look at, and this is a section that most people, especially real estate agents, don't understand how big of an impact new homes and apartments have on our housing market. So this graph shows the percentage, shows housing construction at the national level of single family owner occupied housing by the year the structure is built. The big green section was homes built before 1969. Okay. The blue.
And that's what, 38%?
Yeah, 38%.
So 38% of all houses in the United States.
Yeah, owner occupied housing was built before 69.
Before 69, okay.
Okay. Then in the 70s, about 15% of our existing owner-occupied housing inventory was built in the 70s. In the 80s, about 13%. The 90s, 15%. Okay. And the aughts, 16%. Are you seeing a trend?
It's getting smaller every decade.
Well, it averages about 15% a year typically. But so far, this chart goes through 15. Only 3% of all housing built in the first 6 years of this decade make up the share of housing. So they're running easily over 50% less than where they have in previous decades. So this housing shortage that we're facing in Denver is also a national problem. And you look at this, I mean, this was amazing. Freddie Mac estimated this in the second quarter that our country will need to add between 19 and 21 million more housing units, because that's how many households are going to be formed over the next 7 years by 2025. That means builders need to be building 2.5 million homes and apartments a year for the next 7 years. There's a problem. They're only building half of that.
Do you know what the numbers are for Denver?
Yep, we'll cover that here in a little bit. Okay. Some construction projects on tap just here in Denver. There's over $5.5 billion in projects going on, from DIA to CDOT's expansion of I-70 and other stuff. I mean, and last year, it's been amazing to see what I've learned, like in the commercial world. Last year, builders added over 10 million square feet of office, industrial, and retail space, the most ever. But yet this year, they're expected to add at least 12 million more square feet. And I was at a conference where they said the commercial world is still in the early parts of the peak. They've still got years to go before growth will peter out, they figure.
And so basically all the data we're talking residential, just supply and demand. The commercial side's facing just similar, so much demand for so little supply.
And the commercial construction is in a way an opponent of residential construction, because commercial construction steals away residential construction people.
So you're talking actually like workers,
right? Yeah, because the most commercial projects are union based. And so if you're an electrician, you can make $50 an hour, building an apartment building. Whereas if you're building a home, you may only get $35 an hour.
So that's so interesting. So the workforce or labor force actually gets more money worked on commercial projects versus
the
building a house down the street.
So the commercial industry competes against the residential world of real estate.
Interesting.
So this chart just shows the number of housing permits that were pulled since 2000. The blue at the bottom is the number of for sale permits that were pulled, and the red was apartment permits. And look at this. Look how small the red got in 3, 4, 5, and 6. In 2005, that number, there was 206 apartment permits pulled that year in all of Metro Denver.
How many?
206.
Yeah, so there's no comma in there. 206.
Charles, do you remember why?
Well, because everybody was buying homes.
Right. Yeah. Why rent?
Yeah,
Fog the
because
mirror,
you
get a
were-
loan.
Yeah, because you were loaning money. So
Yeah.
that's exactly the way the world went. And then look how it changed.
Yeah. I mean, even when you look at 2000, 2001, we pulled almost 30,000 permits a year, 20,000 for sale housing, 10,000 apartments. And you look at the last few years here, you know, and it's more, we have more apartment permits than single family home permits.
And what
So-
kind of apartment permits are those? What is generally being built on the apartment rental side?
It's all been high end.
Okay, we keep asking each other questions to see if we
Right.
can stump the other one. And
Yeah,
that's exactly
it's-
right. It's
yeah.
high-end rentals. Yeah,
Right.
by
I
and
mean, so
large.
stuff down in
Yeah,
downtown
that's
Denver,
all
the
the
beautiful
cranes, but
Class
that
A.
That's
with,
not where normal people live.
Right, but that's what's being built because one of the things I keep reading is it's not that much more expensive to build a high-end apartment community than it is to build an affordable one. But the numbers work much better if you can charge rent of $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom than $1,700 a month.
yeah.
And the numbers got to work if you're going to get your loan. And if the numbers don't work, the bank's not going to fund you. So this is the number of new apartments that have been built here in Metro Denver over the last 4 years, a total of like 39,000 of them. And I know they're on pace this year to build 16,000 new apartments. Now, this was very interesting. I remember reading this story last spring in the Colorado Real Estate Journal where they did a study of how many more high-end apartments do we really need. And according to this survey, what they did is they looked at all the people who had moved into high-end apartments in the past 2 years. So this would have been 15 and 16. 51% of those high-end apartment movers, and how they defined high-end was the top 10% of rents.
Okay.
So 51% of those people came from other apartments. 30% had been single-family residents, owners, and 15% had been single-family renters. And what was interesting, they found that in the Denver MSA or the Denver metro area, another 31,000 apartment renters, just apartment renters, could afford to pay a lot more rent. But yet half of them came from single family homes, whether owners or renters.
And they went from owning a home to go renting some cool
high-end
new
apartment. I think
apartment.
sometimes it's probably short term because they're waiting for a house to be built, or sometimes you know people become empty nesters and they go, hey, maybe we'll go live in Rhino or Lodo or something like that. And so before buying, they may go rent for a while and see if they really like it. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So there is incredible demand still for the high-end apartments here in the Metro Denver area, and that's what keeps getting built. One question I've had very, very often is, will apartments be converted into condos? And so it was interesting. I just take a look at these stats. I think this is from about June. There were 2 recently built apartment communities in Metro Denver that sold. One of the tech centers sold for just shy of $300,000 a unit. And another community that was just finished last year in DU sold for $334,000 a unit. And I asked, okay, well, why is this important? Well, if they're going to convert them into condos, and they paid, say, like for that community in the DTC, $298,000, they're going to have to resell them probably at least at $370,000. Because it's probably going to be at least a 20%, 25% markup to be able to make any money. Because you got to pay a team of attorneys to convert them from apartments to condos. Then you got to pay these pesky realtors as well to sell your properties, and you got marketing stuff. So the chances of these properties being converted into condos is pretty slim. Then when you combine that with pretty much all the new apartments that have been built in the last 5-6 years are owned by REITs, pension funds, and insurance companies. And they only know one thing: apartment investing. Or office building investing. They're not into, condoizing apartment buildings. That's not their forte. They just do apartments or just do office space or medical office space. They don't do the onesie stuff with residential. So could we see some conversion of, say, someone who owns a 15-unit apartment building? Yeah. But so far, I haven't seen it. Have you, Charles?
Very little. It's something that people have been talking about for a long time. And I just sort of roll my eyes and say, talk about and think about things that you can control. And this is not something that I enjoy talking about because I can't control it. It's
Right.
fun, I suppose, but I'm not a better investor because I cannot predict this. But no, I don't think there's going to be a lot of conversions, swelling the inventory on the market anytime soon.
And we went to the Myers Research Breakfast a couple months ago, and you can describe on that, but who they are and the data they collect and what they said. I mean,
they're just really phenomenal commercial people, and they just said exactly what you just said, is that there is not a spread. From their perspective, they don't see conversions coming on the market. So let me tell you, they understand that world 10 times better than I do. That's all I needed to hear, is they have no evidence to suggest it's going to happen. Go back and let's talk about something else.
Right. Yeah. Because you just got to go, okay, if they're paying $300,000 for an apartment community in the tech center, and you can only sell it, let's say each unit for $350, there's not enough spread there to do it profitably. They got to be able to sell them for probably $375 to $400, and the resale market doesn't support that yet. Next, what I want to cover is just looking at how is the number of new homes that have been built by builders. And one things I want you to realize is from 97 to 2006, for 10 consecutive years, home builders built and sold over 15,000 new homes a year. In 2005, they sold over 20,000 homes. So they sold a ton of homes. And you look at the numbers the last 4 years here. Last year was a little over 10,000. It's looking like we're going to be probably 11,000, maybe 11,500 this year. And the last time I checked, 11,000 is still less than 15.
And let's not forget, we have a much bigger population in Metro Denver today than we had 10 or 15 years ago.
Right. So here's like new home starts for the first quarter. New home starts here the first quarter, and I just got the second quarter data today as well. New home starts are up 14% right now, which is great, but they still got a long ways to go to get to where they used to be. New home starts used to be 20,000 a year, and we're now at 11, 12,000. So they still got a ways to go to get us there. So the builders are still behind.
And I've heard, I don't know, where just numerous sources, a lot of houses we're building now are much, higher end houses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, as far as higher end versus more of the starter home affordable housings, what the numbers were like in the 90s versus what they are now, percentage wise?
I don't, but I know that there is definitely more higher end housing that has been built the last few years because there's been more demand and there's more profit there.
Right. There's just less supply of land, and ask any builder and they'll say the same thing, is I can't afford to build stuff low to middle income.
And for higher end houses, what's the just general price range of that? I'm just trying to
say a new home.
You putting your hands on a podcast.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're looking at 6 or more.
600 or
pretty much
more.
The higher the better. Yeah. So I know that is it KB Homes actually is trying to come out with attached properties at the lower end, new stuff in the 300s and stuff. They're trying.
Right.
But try being a builder. You just can't
KB,
make money.
Indoor plumbing's an option.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll talk to our attorneys about deleting that.
Sorry about that. We'll delete that one later, but this chart, this is what I have called the holy grail of housing charts.
Absolutely.
This was in the Denver Post back in January. It's called the housing gap chart, and it was created by the state demography office, or the state demography office. And what it shows for each year going back to 2001, the left bar shows the number of new households formed that year, and the right bar shows the number of new housing units built that year. And what we want to see is those two bars be pretty equal, okay?
Yep.
But the only time that happened was in 2007. So you see in 2001 that builders added 26,618 housing units, and only 22,149 new households were formed that year. So builders overbuilt that year. Then we see the same thing. Look at that huge gap in 2002. In 2002, builders overbuilt by over 16,000 new homes. And that continued in 3, 4, 5, and 6, where by 2006, builders had overbuilt by 60,000 homes. And think about it this way. That was basically 4 years of inventory. Selling at 15,000 homes a year. That was 4 years of inventory sitting on the market, with new homes. Right now, they're running less than 2 months of inventory. We were at like 48 months then. But then you look at all of a sudden the market started changing in 07. Look in 07 of how many more new households were formed in 07. It was what? Almost 20,000 new households were formed. And then that number just continued to increase. And ever since 07, builders have fallen behind. And in total, since 07 through 16, builders fell behind by 122,000 housing units.
So that's the pent up demand for.
Right. Yeah. And the net total between these two sets of numbers is 62,000. So for this century, builders are behind by 62,000 housing units.
And we're building about 11,000 per year.
We're between apartments and single family. Last year we built about 23,000. So
we got some catching up to do.
We got a lot of catching up to do. And what was interesting, I started looking at these numbers here and I started adding them up and go, hey, Charles, guess when home prices started to rise by looking at these numbers?
Yeah, when the demand, increases supply.
Yeah, once the number of households exceeded the number of new homes being built, it was 2012. That was when the market turned, and that was when home prices started to soar here in Metro Denver.
And here's some fun math. So if we're adding about 50,000 people to our population per year on average, and the average household has 2.31 units, 2.31 people per household, do that math, that's about 23,000. So at this point, with all the cranes and everything you're seeing, what we're doing is just about keeping up with the demand. But we haven't backfilled the demand that we didn't keep up with the last 6 or 7 or 8 years. That's why we're not getting out of this hole anytime soon.
Right. And this goes back to what's the first rule of getting out of a hole? Chris, do you have any ideas? What's the first rule of getting out of a hole?
Oh, my gosh. Stop digging.
Exactly. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah. So good job. So that's the first thing that the quote builders got to start doing is to quit digging the hole deeper each
What
and
prize
every
do
year.
I win?
A Kit Kat bar.
All right.
Okay. Next thing I want to cover really quickly is just our, one of the things that gets cited quite often and asked about is water. And it was interesting. Aldo Savaldi from the Denver Post wrote this great story last May on this. And he identified 3 factors that make water so expensive along the Front Range. One is the scarcity of available water here on the east side of the Continental Divide. And second is because so many people live on the east side of the Continental Divide, and a majority of our water flows to the west. But the third factor that really, I think, really surprised him and didn't surprise me too much is how much water permits and tap fees are here in Denver. Where Aldo discovered, like Phoenix, where do they get our water from? Colorado. From the Colorado River. Their water permits are 90% less than the cost they are in Metro Denver.
I mean, why is that?
Yeah, I think the reason why is the cities and counties in Denver see the permits or tap fees like a tax. So, if Tabor, we can't raise taxes easily. So, hey, if we call it a fee, we can increase it all we want.
I haven't heard the politicians talk about that for affordable housing.
No, they don't. It's not ever mentioned. I know I've had builders and developers attend this class in person. I remember one earlier this year told me he's building condos up in Winter Park. And I believe, if I remember, I think it was 18 condos. And he said his water permit tap fees are over $20,000 a unit, even though the reservoir where the water's coming from was a mile away.
Wow.
Yeah. So it makes it really hard to build affordable housing here in Denver when you have so much money already built into it, where most of the builders, even in the suburbs, have at least $200,000 into every home before they dig dirt. Wow. Between the cost of the land and all the permits and tap fees. So we have to, and then I wanted to ask, okay, so what's holding back home builders and why is it taking them so long to build? Or it's often taking them 8 to 12 months, sometimes longer than that, to build a new home today. Well, here are some of the factors. One of them is, like, according to Trulia, this was a study done in 2016. Denver County is one of the slowest counties in the country at approving permits at a little over 8 months a permit. Second one is nimbiness, not in my backyard. And that's a big factor in Denver. But guess what? It happens in the suburbs too. Like I wrote about this week in my newsletter, the town of Morrison, which has about 500 people, is going to be voting this fall on whether or not to overrule their city council. Their city council and Lakewood City Council agreed to allow this developer to build, 1,400 homes on 2,200 acres in Rooney Valley along C-470. They're by Bandamere on the east side of C-470.
Yeah.
Wasn't that in your newsletter this morning?
That
was great.
Yeah. And the town of Morrison, their residents are looking to overrule their city council on that. And so because it's too much growth, and and too much density, I'm going 2,200 acres divided by 1,400 lots. That means that's one home per like every 1.5 acres. That's not very dense.
No.
But yet the town of Morrison, the residents there, some of them are up in arms about that happening. So the NIMBYness happens in the suburbs too. A third factor that really impacted us for a long time was the construction defects laws, which kept condos from being built for 10 years. Now the rule and the law has changed a little bit. So we're starting to see condos being built again, but they're still pretty rare. Not as rare as they were, but they are starting to make a comeback. But basically from 2010 of multifamily construction, apartments accounted for over 95% of all that construction. According to the National Association of Home Builders, this one is amazing. Regulatory costs for home builders has increased 30% in the last 5 years nationally. This was going back 2011 to 16. So I went and looked just to see how much new home prices had increased nationally. It was exactly 30%.
Now, what's a regulatory cost? What does that mean?
Okay, well, we can break it. Sometimes you say, okay, yeah, I have it here. Now, this was from apartments. I haven't seen it broken out by single-family homes. But you can see here it comes from the cost of getting zoning approval. It's inclusionary zoning costs. It's, forcing people to do solar, or now in Denver, in bigger buildings, green roof initiative, all kinds of crazy stuff of where, like here, this chart from the National Association of Home Builders, like for 2016, the regulatory cost in building a new home nationally was about $85,000 total. And here in Metro Denver, I can guarantee you it's more than that.
Yeah, if the water tap fees are that much, it's
right. Yeah,
it's got to be more.
I mean, it's ridiculous. So honestly, our local governments are very much a part of the problem of why housing is so unaffordable in Metro Denver.
And by the way, who's that good for? You and me.
Yeah, it is.
The landlords.
Right. Yep. So some more reasons that we're seeing out there of what's holding back builders is there's not enough lots. Like I was at a big land conference this morning of where basically single family home builders want to have a 24-month supply of buildable vacant land. Right now we're running 12 months. So, and it's taken them about 12 months, 8 to 10 months to build. So basically, as soon as they're done, they're moving on to the next property, and there just isn't enough property out there that's available. Another thing is just our land is a lot more expensive here. I remember reading last year a story from a big builder in Nashville, another really hot city real estate-wise in the country, of where this company had bought all this land, was going to build thousands of homes, and it was an area about 20 miles southeast of downtown Nashville. So sort of like Parker for us.
Yeah.
And I calculated out the builder spent $6,600 per lot.
Seems pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah. Well, here in in the Denver area, a lot of times you got to add at least one more zero to that number. Now, sometimes you'll get the number smaller than 66,000, but they're really small lots. Like I was learning this morning, some of the builders are now starting to build like on a 30 by 50 foot lot and putting a single family home on.
So just going vertical.
Just going vertical. And so just to try to make it, quote, affordable. Like I mentioned earlier, is all the commercial construction. If we had less commercial construction, we could build more residential. Another factor is that our high schools are honestly a college prep factory. They're designed to send every kid to college. And that's both a school problem, but also a societal problem. Whereas a society, we believe every kid ought to go to college. Well, not every kid is college material. So that's a problem. Another thing here, and I've heard this complaint for 20 years from all kinds of people, of subcontractors, is that here in the Metro Denver area, we have 34 sets of rules and regs that builders and subs have to comply with. So if you want to make something cheaper, one of the things you got to do is homogenize it and commoditize it. Well, how do you do that, Charles, when there's 34 different sets of rules?
Yeah, I used to be a flipper, and what drove me out of that business was just the terror I had when the electrical inspector was showing up. So I'm going to happily say I have no idea because I haven't done it for over a decade.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just really hard. But the biggest factor comes back, what's holding back home builders, just there isn't enough labor, qualified labor to build homes. And this was a great story from the Denver Post last July. I loved this quote. The construction leaders say the problem was caused by a perfect storm. Record low unemployment, an aging workforce for them, the narrative that everyone has to go to college, massive layoffs of construction workers during the recession who never returned, a lack of affordable housing, and a huge demand for construction work across Colorado. That pretty much sums up our problems. Next, is it going to get any better?
My guess is probably not.
Yeah. So it was interesting. National Association.
That went in their Kit Kat?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
The National Association of Home Builders surveyed last year young millennials, those ages 18 to 25, to see how many are thinking about choosing construction as a career choice. Only 3% said yes. Think about that. Just 3% are thinking about that. And so the HBA asked, well, why? Well, 48% have said the work's too physically demanding, and the other 32% said to believe the work's too difficult. So 80% of them basically just said, I'm too lazy to do it. Okay. I'd rather work at Starbucks as a barista at $12 an hour. Okay. So then the HBA asked them, okay, well, what level of compensation would it take to get you to change their mind? 43% of them said they wouldn't consider the construction trades at any level of compensation.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in high school, like what I did for my high school summer jobs and college summer job was I worked for a general contractor. It was $10 an hour, $15 overtime.
Yeah.
I worked all the time. It was the best money I could make. I loved it.
Right. Yeah. But that doesn't happen. It happens very little anymore.
That's so interesting.
Oh, so I thought of this picture about 3 years ago. So I had someone draw it for me of where I've always thought of supply and demand like a teeter-totter. On the demand side of the teeter-totter, we have a Japanese sumo wrestler who weighs 400 pounds. On the supply side of the teeter-totter is Kate Moss at 90 pounds. So for the market to get back in balance, either the sumo wrestler has to lose a bunch of weight or Kate Moss has to gain a bunch of weight. So Chris, which one's going to happen?
I don't want to answer that question. I think I'll get in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah, but seriously, neither. I mean, neither.
Neither is going to happen. And that's the problem with our housing market is it's so out of balance, and I don't know how it's going to get back in balance. For it to happen, we got to go, okay, we've talked about supply and of how far behind the builders are and of how they got to quit digging the hole and start catch up because they're behind by 62,000 housing units. But if they're not able to increase the supply enough, that means demand has to drop. And then we have to ask ourselves these types of questions. Are people going to quit moving here?
No.
Okay. Will we lose jobs?
Probably not.
Will income growth end?
Probably not.
Will interest rates soar?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. How about will our mountains disappear? Will our 300 days of sunshine go away? Or will we outlaw marijuana? The answer is no on those last three. Okay. So if supply is not going to increase and it doesn't look like demand is going to decrease, we've got a problem. And this has been acknowledged going back to over 2 years ago when Sylvania Goodell, chief economist at Zillow, said this about the Denver market. She said this kind of rapid and unflagging growth could be worrisome and may indicate a local bubble starting to form in Denver. However, she points out it takes much more than just rocket-like growth to fuel a bubble. She then said, when growth is driven by solid underlying economic fundamentals, hey, Chris, isn't that what we've been talking about?
Yep.
Exactly. Like strong job and wage growth, true housing demand, limited supply, and not rampant speculation, which is the case in Denver. She said, no matter how high prices rocket, it doesn't mean a bubble is inevitable. So I don't have a PhD in economics. I have a PhD in common sense, but, I agree with Dr. Goodell here. And then I remember at that time, my favorite local economist is Patty Silverstein, and she was asked about that. And she basically agreed because it's all about the fundamental supply and demand factors of our economy here in Denver is so strong. Then another great national economist, Elliot Eisenberg, said this when he was in town last year. He said, we're not in a housing bubble. There's a ton of problems in housing, but none of them have to do with too much credit. And one of the things I want people to understand is credit availability today is still less than half of what it was 15 years ago or even 18 years ago. I remember back in 2000, my wife and I bought our first home, and we got a loan from Homecomings Financial, which was a subsidiary of GMAC. And Homecomings had a conventional loan that was at 107% loan to value, meaning they paid all my closing costs and prepaids and gave me more money to buy my home. I didn't give them money. They gave me money. And we still don't have a true 100% no money down program besides VA loans.
Yeah, I know. Now I go buy investment property. Lenders want 20% down.
Yeah. We want some skin in the game, baby. Gosh. So it's just amazing. Credit is still so much tighter. And imagine if credit was as loose as it was a dozen years ago, what demand would be like. Can you imagine that, Charles? If everyone could buy a home
on the fire,
it would be gasoline on the fire. We'd probably have home prices already at like 700,000 or something.
Right.
So, some historical context. This chart here from Your Castle just showing average single family home prices going back to 1971. And what the main thing I want you to understand is that on average, our homes have appreciated 6.3% a year on average for 45 plus years. That's the highest appreciation rate in the country. That basically means, by the rule of 72s, that homes are doubling in price about every 12 years.
So what's the rule of 72?
You take the number of 72, divide it by the interest rate you're earning, will tell you how many years it will take for your money to double. So if you take 72 divided by 6%, that tells you it's going to take you about 12 years for your money to double. And that's what's been happening in housing, and it's been this way for 45 years. I've had people ask me, well, what about other time periods? Well, I know since 91 and 2001, both as well, Denver has had the highest average appreciation rate in the country. And what we've noticed is we've had basically two 16-year-long bull runs where prices increased for 16 consecutive years, two different times, once from 71 through 87, and then from another time that it happened, here from what was it, about 91 through 2006 or 2007. And you can see how, like, from the 70s to the 80s, home prices increased an average increase of 9.4% a year for 16 years. So when people say that home prices can't keep going up by high single digits for a long time period, they're wrong, because it's happened before. And even from the 90s through 2007, we saw average annual appreciation of 7.5% a year. So you go, okay, prices began to rise here in Denver in 2012. So we're now in year 7. Now, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it's often said that it rhymes. So that may mean we may have another 9 years of prices increasing here substantially in the Denver area. So if prices go up 6% a year, even just the national or long-term average, that's going to be a big increase of where instead of a $500,000 home, that home's going to be $750,000, $800,000 in 9 years pretty easily. So one question I get asked is, okay, when will home prices drop? So here's a quick slide, and I've actually created a second class just on this topic of where, from my research of looking at the data, we don't see prices drop until we have more than 6 months of inventory for at least 2 consecutive years. And then you look back here as of December 16, builders were behind by 62,000 housing units. And you go longer back to 2000, Metro Denver's added 324,000 new households, or about 20,000 new households a year. We don't know how many new households were formed yet last year in Denver. That data has not been released by the state. But last year, we do know builders built about 23,000 units. So let's assume only 20,000 new households were formed last year. So the builders got ahead by 3,000 units. How long would it take at 3,000 extra units a year would it take for builders to make up that gap, that shortage of 62,000?
A lot of math.
Yeah, sorry. It's about 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So imagine that, based on that, it may take the builders, 20 years to catch up. And I always go, I still hear clients and people say, well, I'm going to wait till home prices drop. Well, by the time they drop, the average home price in Denver could be $1 million. So I go, are you willing to lose out on $500,000 of equity just to buy one on the dip?
And I heard people say that 4 years ago, and the prices are up 40% since then. So one of the things that Lonnie and I are not are market timers. We get to talk about this stuff. We're fascinated by it, but we're the first ones to not time the market for ourselves or helping our clients.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know, unfortunately, like earlier this year, I went through all my old prospect files and stuff and had to go through and go, wow, there was definitely some people, I was talking to 13 and 14, 15 that were on the edge then of being able to buy a home and prices were a lot lower. And I'm like, there's no way they could now.
Yeah.
That's right.
They missed their chance. So yes, could 2008 happen again? Well, back then, credit was so much easier. And you look at it today, if here in Denver, the average down payment is close to 20%, the average credit score in Metro Denver is running around 755 to 760.
That's the average?
That's
that
the
good?
average. Yeah.
Wow.
That's impossible.
It's just, we're only lending to the cream of the crop.
So that would be the
Wow.
average credit score of people who buy homes.
Buy homes.
Yeah, people who buy homes.
Right.
Okay.
And even FHA borrowers nationally have close to a 700 credit score on average every quarter. And I go, okay, so who's winning the bidding wars the last 5 or 6 years? Is it our Chaffa buyers with bad credit needing seller concessions?
Nope.
No. It's people paying cash or putting a lot of money down, waiving inspection and appraisal objections because they have a lot of money in the bank. And because of that, they have a lot of skin in the game, and there's very limited chances of them ever losing their homes to a short sale or foreclosure. So, I mean, you saw this like last year, only 0.3% of all home sales June of last year were distressed sales. And there was actually, I can't remember if it was August or September last year, there were exactly 0 distressed sales in the Metro Denver last year.
Between 2010 and 2012, I went 26 months and I closed something like 88 deals, and not one of them was non-distressed. Just to tell you what it was like during the downturn. I went over 2 years and never closed a non-distressed. They were all short sales and bank-owned properties during the downturn.
And how many distressed properties you closed in the last 2 years?
The weirdest thing is it would have been 0, except we bought a property in Colorado Springs a couple of months ago that weirdly enough was an REO. I cannot explain that, but it's probably been, that was probably the first one in 5-6 years at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the REO and short sales have gone the way of the dodo bird. And it just comes back to, we have the lowest mortgage delinquency rate in the nation. And like I wrote about on an updated, stats to this one this week is, the delinquency rate, like even 90 days late, is like 0.6% in Metro Denver.
So it's practically nothing.
Yeah, practically nothing. And if people aren't 30, 60, 90 days late, they're not going to be, going into short sale or foreclosure anytime soon. And I go, a lot of times people go, well, they always say that homes are not affordable in Denver. Well, if that truly was the case, our delinquency rate would be a lot higher. But actually, our delinquency rate is still dropping, which tells me the homes are affordable to the people who can afford to buy them. Yes, they're not affordable to a lot of the renters out there, but they are affordable to most of the homeowners.
And by the way, who is that good for?
It's good for us as landlords as well.
It's just the way it is. early part of this century, 02, 03, 04, these were very, very tough times for landlords because it was so easy to buy homes. They didn't need to rent. And the market has just changed, and it's not going to change anytime soon. These are 10, 20-year patterns. So when it's easy to buy, it's tough for the landlords. When it's not easy to buy, it's really, really good for the landlords. And that's the market we've been in for years, and we're going to stay there for years. That's why I bought another 7 properties.
Yep. Here's just a final summary that I created of looking at 5 primary factors or economic numbers. And I compared them 02 to 06 and then 2012 to 2016. Homes for sale end of the year from 02 to 06, we averaged over 22,000 homes for sale in the existing home market. From 12 to 16, we averaged 5,700 homes for sale. So that put months of inventory, average months of inventory from 02 to 06 was a little over 6 months on average. From 12 to 16, it was 1.84 months, and that number is still dropping. This is what's amazing. From 02 to 06, builders built 93,000 new single-family homes. From 12 to 16, they only built 30,000. Then you look at job growth. Okay, we had pretty good job growth from 02 to 06, 86,000 new jobs. But from 12 to 16, we had over 180,000. Here's the main thing I want to point out is net migration to Denver from 02 to 06 was 24,000, but yet builders built 93,000 homes. I'd like to ask, I think I know who was smoking weed first. It was the home builders. Either that or they fired all their economists and demographers because there was no good economic reason to build 93,000 new homes when we only had net migration to Denver of 24,000 people in those 5 years. By the net migration numbers, they needed to build about 10,000 new homes, and they built 93,000. That was just absurd. And then you look at 12 to 16, our net migration here into Denver was 190,000, but we've only built 30,000 homes when we should have built, 80,000 homes. So the numbers have flip-flopped of where do you see the bubble? Well, it's back in 02 to 06 is where the bubble was at because we had 6 months of inventory of existing homes, and we also had basically about a 4-year supply of new homes for sale then too. We just had way too much supply. Today, we're running about 1.5 months of existing homes, and the builders are running about 1.5, maybe 2 months of supply of new homes for sale. So combined, we have about 3 months of supply of homes for sale in Metro Denver. Whereas, back in 06, we were running about 4.5 years, 3 months to 4.5 years. So where's the bubble?
I mean, I don't see it.
Yeah, it was back in 02 to 06. That's where the bubble was. And I just go, how can you have a bubble when there's not enough supply?
Yeah.
And the answer is you can't. You can feel that there is, but you don't have the facts on your side.
So let me ask this as we wrap up here, Lonnie. I mean, this is just, first off, this is just an incredible presentation put together. Like, hats off to you for doing this. I know this is, we spent an hour and a half discussing it. I know it took way more than an hour and a half to compile it. So I appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners and webinar viewers appreciate it too. But I'm going to ask you both, Charles and Lonnie, I mean, what is the takeaway for investors from this, and what's the takeaway from homeowners? Can you guys boil it down? I know it's a very open-ended question, but that's what, hey, we got this information. It does not look like we're in a bubble. So that means what for me as an investor?
Well, I'm going to start by saying, as an investor, I think you should stop thinking you can time the market, which is interesting because we're all kind of saying we don't think there's a bubble. But the bigger picture is just stop trying to time the market. Yeah. Timing the market does not a good investor make. Someone who's done this for over 20 years, that's one of maybe my top 3 lessons, is don't try to time the market. That's
time in the market.
It's time in the market, and it's about controlling what you can control. So when I buy properties, and the properties that I bought, I hold on forever. That's how I know that I'm going to make all this money, and I have made tons of money because it's exactly what you said. It's time in the market. So number 1, stop thinking that you read an article on Zillow and you know something nobody else knows and you can time the market. That's just foolish. Just stop. Now, when people put guns to our heads and say, all right, just give me an answer. Well, this is our answer. As we look at this, we kind of shrug our shoulders and say, we just don't see anything changing this anytime soon. The truth is, I know, speaking for myself, all of the data suggests the same thing that we've been saying for the last 5 years, because it's been 5 years that people have been telling us the market is going to explode and the bubble is going to pop. It's just, we don't see it. The number one thing is the inventory. The inventory is still at record low homes on the market per capita, very low inventory. We just don't see it happening for a while. I'm, years out. Let's put it that way. That's my bet.
Right. And so, like, say, this is how I think about it. I go, I think it's still a great time to invest long term in real estate in Metro Denver, whether it be buying your own house for you and your family to live in, to buying rental properties. And like, say, for me, okay, what am I going to be looking for to quote maybe spot the next bubble or next trouble? Is, look at months of inventory. It's really one of the best stats you can look at. And that starts getting to be 5-6 months. Okay, that could be a sign of that happening, but it still may be 2, 3, 4 years away. So that could be an early sign, but that means inventory levels have basically got to quadruple from where they're at right now.
I mean, that's not going to happen overnight.
No, exactly. If job growth ends and the unemployment rate goes up, I mean, it'd be amazing to have an unemployment rate of 5% now. But, probably, if it really gets to 6-7%, I'd start getting a little worried possibly. Population growth, if we start seeing the number of people moving here dropping substantially, then that would be a cause of concern for me. But even if it happened for a couple years, all it is a brief relaxation or recess that will allow the builders to catch up some with backed up demand. Next is just, the builders are just so far behind that I think it's going to take them 10 to 12 years to catch up, if they ever catch up. And if, like, Amazon were to move their second headquarters here, I will just say right now, I don't think the builders will ever catch up in Metro Denver.
I mean,
you had 50,000 more new jobs, say, over the next 10 years of high paying jobs like that to a bunch of engineers who will all buy homes. There's just no way that the builders will ever keep up. So I'm like, you got to be long-term investors, and look and keep buying right now, because there's still, opportunities, but it's a long-term game. But like I often tell my clients is, yes, it would have been better if you bought 5 years ago, but we can't change the past. You can change your future. And there's an old ancient Chinese proverb about the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Yep.
So plant your tree today in home ownership or in investing in real estate, and plant your tree today. Decide today's the day that I'm going to make that decision to buy, whether it be my own home or to start buying rentals. Plant your flag, plant your tree. Today's the day.
Well, that is a perfect note to end this on. So, Lonnie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for putting this together. Charles, thank you for attending too. And just as a quick couple quick notes, we've mentioned this on a previous podcast with Lonnie when he did one on lending with us. But Charles and I both will say Lonnie has probably the best newsletter in real estate around Denver, around the country even. I mean, it really, it is a lot of things. So get on the newsletter, whether you're an investor, a realtor, a homeowner, whatever. It's just great data. And Lonnie, the best way for people to get that is texting you?
Text me your email address. My cell phone number is 303-881-6374. That's 303-881-6374. And I'll be happy to add you to my newsletter list. I have over 800 subscribers right now, and about my open rate's about 42-43% a week on average, which I've been told is an amazingly high number.
It is. You should you need to create a course and sell it for $1,000 because the industry average on open rates is in the single digits.
Right.
So I know that as a marketer, so that is great. And so I'll put Lonnie's phone number in the show notes. So reach out to him for questions or for questions on lending. Reach out to him to get on the newsletter. And if you guys got questions on investing or look at property, reach out to Charles or myself. I mean, it's the stuff we love talking about. I mean, we are like almost 2 hours into this and we're still going strong. So everyone, thank you for listening and watching. And Lonnie, Charles, thank you again.
Thank you.